Greetings, people who really like the accordion. As I mentioned before, under the video title that you're watching, you'll see some data. If you click on this ellipsis, the description box will open in its entirety. If you can remember, try to open the description box on my videos because I try to provide useful information. Okay? This video that you're watching goes with these previous videos. This goes together with these. I'm going to try to wrap up the topic today and follow up on my last video. In my last video, I tried to explain the differences between the traditional Stradella chart, for the bass machine, okay, and the chart that I have for my personal use for many, many years, and I'm now presenting it. And you might find it slightly complicated because it doesn't go at an angle, but it gives you a lot of information. I mean, it really gives you a lot of information. I'll hold that up in case you want to print screen. And you can find this file on my community tab on my main YouTube page, okay, my home page. Now, I tried to show the difference between the traditional chart, which I've shown you many times, and my own personal chart, which I'm only now showing you because this one's handier, and that's why I call it the handy chart. Well, the main difference, I think, is because the traditional contemporary chart is heterogeneous, meaning it's not completely consistent, not entirely uniform. And mine, the scale phrase chart, that's my channel, is homogeneous. In other words, I try to make everything as uniform as possible, as consistent as possible, as clear as possible, and provide categorically the most information as possible, okay? Now, the thing that differentiates my chart from others, and there are many others, are 5 key points, 5 key features, and I'm going to read these to you. That's a lot to get on there. I'm going to read this to you and try to show clearly why mine is different, and as far as theory is concerned, maybe better, okay? On my chart, all right, the bass and counter bass tones are correctly listed from left to right in intervals of fifths, just like on my invention, the amplified circle of fifths, okay? The bass, counter bass, minor third interval then is maintained throughout the 2 ranks, okay? So what does that mean visually? I start on this side with the bass tone, B double flat, and I move in fifths across the chart, all right? And I end up with A sharp, okay? I don't know if that'll focus in right. So you see that your bass and counter bass tones keep the proper major third interval the whole way across. I hope I'm speaking correctly because I've been known to speak wrong. Anyway, so you see your bass and counter bass, all right, ranks are consistent. Interval minor third all the way across. So that's established, and that's a strong feature, okay? Now, let's go back to our list. In each file, the tones listed for each chord button are the correct tones required to form the chord that the button represents. Okay, I'll say it again. In each file, the tones listed for each chord button are the correct tones required to form the chord that the button represents. So visually, let's take a peek here. You see your major rank of buttons. These are your buttons. Each rectangle represents a button. So you see here, for your major chord, you have the correct tones. C, E, G. Over here, let's say you have a flat, C, E flat. But these are all correct tones. In other words, the problem with the the handy chart that's been around for a long time, and there's many different versions, all right? They don't always list the correct tones. They list tones that are enharmonic. They sound the same, but it's a different note. Enharmonic means you can have two different notes that sound the same, okay? But I list the tones for each chord literally as they're supposed to be, as they're supposed to be in theory. So for my major, minor, I list the exact tones that you're going to experience when you press those buttons. Okay? Now, let's move down to feature number 3. The root tone of every chord in a given file is the file's bass tone. I'll say it again. The root tone of every chord in a given file is the file's bass tone. So you see here, let's say we have C, okay? Counterbass C, that's your root. So that root that bass tone is the root for each chord, no matter what the chord button, okay? See that? It's consistent. You have a C root for each of the 4 chord buttons, okay? Now, another feature. Number 4, the fact that tones are missing in the dominant 7th and diminished 7th chords is clearly indicated. The fact that there are missing tones is clearly indicated. So you see down here for my dominant 7th row, for example, you see there's an N dash, and that lets you know that that tone is missing, okay? Now for the diminished 7th chord, you see here also the N dashes, that's EN dash, and that clearly indicates that those fifths are missing. So the fifths are missing here, and they're missing here, but you still have consistency. Like I said, if you have a C file, you have only C chords with C as the root of the chord, and you also see in my charts that the tones are stacked the way they would be on notated music. The lower tone on the bottom and the higher one on the top, see? From low to high. All right, now, this is an important one. This is very important. Number 5, in a given file, the diminished chord buttons tones, and I talked about this in previous videos, okay? The diminished chord buttons tones are those of the diminished 7th chord built on the file's bass tone, not on the bass tone's relative minor. Okay, so hold on. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, your diminished 7th rank. Okay, that's your rank. Let's say we're doing C again. Okay, all right. The tones in this button here, all right, the tones are the tones of the C diminished 7. And that only, C diminished 7. Okay? This is the confusing part, and I want to be clear. In a given file, the diminished chord buttons tones, the tones that are realized when you press that button, are those of the diminished 7th chord built on the file's bass, not on the bass tone's relative minor. Now you say, well, you kind of hinted at that in the last video, and I got confused. That's what you say. Well, that's partially my fault. Let me show you this. On my scale phrase Stradella Ranks chart that I just showed you, okay, you'll see this. You'll see the diminished 7th rank, okay? I just showed you that, right? But on the traditional or contemporary chart, most of the time you will see on the diminished rank, okay, on the diminished rank of the traditional chart, you will many, many times, in many cases, see, okay, not not the tones of the C diminished seventh chord, but you will see the tones of that C's relative minor, which is A. This is the relative minor of C. So you'll see a diminished chord on your traditional chart, ordinarily listed as a plain old simple diminished chord, but built on a root that is the relative minor, okay, minor third below the C, okay? It's the C file. That's the C file, but like I said, on the traditional modern charts, a lot of times you'll see this diminished buttons tones listed as an A diminished chord. And that is what I'm trying to tell you about my chart. You don't get the heterogeneous thing where you have a mixture of several different ideas or concepts. You have basically only one major concept and theme that you're following. There's basically one major premise that you are following. That is what I've been trying to tell you. And you can find this, like I said, on my homepage under the community tab. Well, I hope I explained that correctly, because it was important to make this clear so I can be done with it and move on to another topic. So thanks for being super patient, and I hope to see you in the next series, whatever that might be. Good night.